Thank you everybody for being here and for your interest in the Tijuana River Valley. I'm Councilmember Moreno. I represent the 8th District in the city of San Diego, which includes the Tijuana River Valley. This environmental disaster hits very close to home for me. I live less than a mile away from the Tijuana River Valley. So this picture that you see was from one of our hikes, just a mile away from my home. So I have the distinct honor, I guess you can say, of smelling the contamination when flows run rampant. The wastewater pollution issue has been impacting this unique wetland habitat and our communities for far too long. And it's not something that we as a city can solve by ourselves. My office has helped organize cleanups. We had a cleanup at Smugglers in August of last year. In just a few hours, we collected 3 pickup loads of trash. So solving this issue requires investment and action from every level of government on both sides of the border. One of my first actions as a council member for District 8 was to successfully push the city to sue the federal government over the mismanagement of the Tijuana River Valley. We began seeing results last year when our local delegation of elected officials secured over $300 million in federal funding to help combat pollution. The state of California is offering $15 million through the State Coastal Conservancy for pollution mitigation projects. And from Senate Bill 507, the County of San Diego completed a needs and opportunity assessment that identified 26 major infrastructure improvements and cleanup efforts that will benefit from allocating these funds. Thank you for everybody who came in. If you guys can mute yourselves, please. Thank you. As you guys know, this is a binational issue, so it's going to require a binational solution. We continue to work with the Mexican government and the North American Development Bank to ensure that solutions are also implemented south of the border. UC San Diego's Scripps Institute of Oceanography has been conducting research in the Tijuana River Valley for several decades, and the research presented here today will directly help us achieve our goal of restoring this unique natural resource. I'd like to first introduce Scripps Director, Dr. Margaret Leiman. Dr. Leiman was appointed the 11th Director of Scripps Institute of Oceanography at UC San Diego in July of 2013. She also serves as UC San Diego's Vice Chancellor for Marine Science and Dean of the School of Marine Science. Dr. Leiman is an award-winning oceanographer and distinguished national and international leader in ocean science, global climate, and environmental issues. At Scripps, Dr. Leiman leads UC San Diego's Ocean, Earth, Atmospheric, and Climate Science Research and Education programs. The foremost environmental research institution addressing the preserving environmental challenges facing our planet. Scripps provides the knowledge necessary to understand and address these challenges, teaches the next generation of science leaders, and also partners with government, nonprofit, and private sectors to translate knowledge into action. So without further ado, Dr. Leiman, please feel free to take the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Moreno. First, your partnership and collaborative efforts are really appreciated by UC San Diego and Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And thank you for this fantastic opportunity to share with the residents of District 8 the work that Scripps researchers are doing to better understand, predict, and address Tijuana River Valley pollution impacts, both impacts on the environment and on public health. So with apologies for my pronunciation to our Spanish-speaking audience members, muchísimas gracias por esta oportunidad. Es un placer estar aquí con todos ustedes. District 8 knows this issue firsthand. When the council member and I met to discuss Scripps research in the Tijuana River Valley, she shared with me that there are some mornings she will leave her home only to find her car completely covered with pollutants before she even drives to work. And I shared with her that the summer before last, I walked the Tijuana River Valley Park Trail from Dairy Mart Road near her home to the estuary, and it was beautiful. And then I came back along the river where I saw the incredible pollution there. And I'm sure that many of you watching this webinar have had very similar experiences. The flow of sewage and pollutants into this region has resulted in environmental, health, and economic impacts that must be addressed. For nearly 20 years, Scripps scientists have been doing critical research activity in and around the Tijuana River Valley. This evening, we'll hear from researchers working to understand these pollution impacts, to inform decision makers, and to determine potential solutions to protect both the public and the natural environment. They've pioneered innovative observing systems and modeling to monitor and predict pollutant levels and the transport of pollutants at the shoreline, in the coastal ocean, and in the atmosphere. But there is more work to be done to fully develop these capabilities and to support the validation of permanent infrastructure solutions and provide real-time hazardous event notifications and forecasts that are linked to specific human health risks. But before they get started to talk to you about that, I'd like to share with you a little video that will show you about UC San Diego's Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Scripps is one of the most important research centers in the world for atmosphere, ocean, and earth science research and education. Our scientists work to understand and protect the planet and to find solutions to our greatest environmental challenges. San Diego has been our home since we were founded in 1903, and we're here to be a scientific resource for you, for San Diego and the world. So with that, here's the video.
Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego is one of the world's leading centers for earth science research and education. Located on 177 acres overlooking the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla, California, Scripps is home to cutting-edge scientific facilities and an active research pier for scientific diving training, boat operations, and environmental monitoring stations. Scientists at Scripps Institution of Oceanography research our planet in many ways, including advancing our understanding of climate change science and testing adaptation solutions. We study natural hazards like earthquakes, tsunamis, coastal erosion, wildfires, and atmospheric rivers to help communities and first responders be better prepared. Our researchers conduct conservation and biodiversity research to maintain the integrity of ocean ecosystems. We research the intersection of the ocean and human health, including discovering drugs from the sea, the ocean microbiome, and the impacts of environmental pollutants. We investigate the complex changes taking place in the polar regions. These changes will impact sea level rise, polar ecosystems, and the global climate system. We lead scientific inquiry vital to our nation's defense and maintaining a competitive advantage that strengthens national security. Our researchers invent and operate sensors, instruments, and systems to observe our environment from microscopic to global scales. Programs include the iconic Keeling curve, which measures carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and Argo, a network of 4,000 robotic floats that track the changing state of the ocean. Scripps offers Bachelor's of Science degrees, Master's degrees, and PhD programs in marine biology, oceanography, earth sciences, and environmental systems. A professional master's program offers training for future leaders in climate science and policy and marine biodiversity and conservation. The institution serves 300 graduate students and 800 undergraduate majors. More than 5,000 UC San Diego undergraduate students are enrolled in 85 Scripps-taught courses on geosciences, marine biology, atmospheric science, climate change solutions, and more. Scripps operates a fleet of 4 academic research vessels, including RV Sally Ride, the newest in America's research fleet, and a new coastal vessel, RV Bob and Betty Beister. The fleet is available to researchers and students via the UC Ship Funds program, with 500 students participating in research at sea each year. Birch Aquarium serves as the public exploration center for Scripps Oceanography and features Scripps science, conservation breeding programs, and interactive exhibits. Birch Aquarium provides hands-on learning for 500,000 visitors and ocean science education to 50,000 pre-K through 12th grade students each year. In the 2019-2020 fiscal year, Scripps had a $281 million operating budget, including $216 million in sponsored research from federal and state resources, like the U.S. Navy, National Science Foundation, NOAA, NASA, and Ocean Protection Council. Private philanthropy raised nearly $20 million for capital projects, conservation, student scholarships, and more. Scripps also partners with industry to advance the ocean-powered blue economy, leading industry-sponsored research and marine technology development, and licensing new intellectual property for commercial use. Carrying the torch forward, our alumni are scientific and environmental leaders and innovators across government, industry, and education. Their impact spans from the deep oceans to outer space and highlights the realization of Scripps' mission to understand and protect our planet and find solutions to our greatest environmental challenges.
That was great. Thank you, Dr. Leiman. We have our first presentation from Dr. Clarissa Anderson and Dr. Falk Feddersen. Dr. Anderson is the Executive Director of the Southern California Coastal Observing System, or SCOOS. She manages this ocean observing system, which includes high-frequency radar for surface current measurements, operational glider lines, automated shore station, biodiversity, and ocean acidification monitoring. Dr. Anderson's academic work is in the field of phytoplankton ecology. The majority of her research has focused on the prediction of harmful algae bloom and toxins in estuaries and coastal ecosystems, as well as the fate and transport of harmful toxins to deep waters and sediment. Dr. Feddersen is a professor at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, studying various aspects of coastal and nearshore oceanography. Dr. Feddersen's research includes instrument development, observation, theory, and modeling. His extensive field work experience includes projects in La Jolla, Huntington Beach, and Imperial Beach in California. It has resulted in new insights and findings that are vital for understanding how pollution moves across the coastline. Thank you both for being here so much. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you so very much. I will get this going. All systems go. All right. Good evening, and thank you, Councilmember Moreno, for the introduction. My plan is to kick off this set of talks that focus on Tijuana River Valley with something of a broad overview from the SCOOS perspective. First, I'm going to give a brief background on my organization called SCOOS, the Southern California Coastal Ocean Observing System, which is based here at Scripps. And then I'm going to tell you about some of the data and predictions that we're producing to help the community understand risk from pollution, toxins, when we go out and play near the ocean, if we want to catch fish, harvest shellfish, whatever your recreation of choice might be. So the punchline is really that many of these threats are not animals like sharks. They're things that you might not imagine, things that are so tiny you may never even see them. And so we're going to each kind of illustrate some of that tonight. I'm going to advance here, make sure this is working. There we go. So this is the team. That's me on the left, along with the SCOOS team. I want to point out, though, that we represent a much larger group of scientists and partners in the Southern California region that I could possibly fit on this slide. So collectively, we're tasked with observing the ocean and delivering that information to the public, much in the same way that the National Weather Service, for instance, measures what's happening in the atmosphere. They run weather models, and then they deliver weather forecasts to the public. So this here gives you a bird's eye view on the left, and then a more three-dimensional view on the right of SCOOS activities. We're making a lot of measurements. Almost all of these are daily They're delivered on our website, almost all of them in real time. And this includes underwater autonomous vehicles that dive as deep as 1,000 meters or over 3,000 feet below the surface. Closer to shore, we have sensors on buoys and piers that tell divers, surfers, swimmers what it's like in the water at any given time, whenever you might want to know that. We support a number of technologies that make all of this work possible. And I already mentioned the underwater gliders that are shown again here, but a second really important technology is called high frequency radar. It measures the speed of the surface currents in the ocean from many, many land-based radars throughout the region. The surface current velocity and the information that we get from it is really critical for search and rescue operations by the US Coast Guard and for responding to oil spills in a rapid, effective manner. And those are just two of the really important reasons why we would want to take these measurements. Another one that might not be as obvious is that these surface current data are also useful for tracking pollution. So SCOOS creates and delivers an online web-based tool that predicts where particles of pollution that are released from a point source, this is in a theoretical simulated sense, this release, and we would think of a point source as something like the Tijuana River or other outfalls. And then we look at where those particles might move either up or down the coast or offshore entirely. And we call this the pollution plume as it disperses. And the tool that I'm describing here is accessible on our website at the URL or the web link here shown. And it works by releasing those hypothetical particles that I was describing every hour and tracking them over a 3-day period. So this becomes very useful when you have a major atmospheric river or rain event like the one we saw in spring of 2017 when there was a major sewage spill that dumped over 300,000 gallons of raw sewage into the ocean at Imperial Beach. I'm sure you all remember it received a lot of press and was pretty devastating. So this exposure map here shows the area of influence from the Tijuana River plume following most rain events. And as you can see from this heat map on the left, not only people visiting beaches are at risk, which is the areas in orange, but you also can get this extension of this area of influence moving into the blue colors that potentially endangers protected habitat, such as that located in the Tijuana River National Estuary Research Reserve, and sensitive animal species in marine protected areas. So to understand some of the biological impacts in the ocean, SCOOS routinely samples the microscopic plants or the algae of the ocean. We call them phytoplankton. Tiny algae, they're invisible to the naked eye, and they're related to the kelp type seaweed that you might be more familiar with from walking along the beaches or diving or swimming. So why do we care about these phytoplankton? Well, one of the reasons that I certainly care is that some of them can produce toxins that are harmful to humans when they get into our shellfish or our fish, and then we consume them, we can get sick. They can also make marine life sick. So I've listed just 3 of those toxins in red here and tried to illustrate how they stack up relative to other known venomous and toxic organisms. So saxitoxin at the top, for example, is up there with the deadliest creatures on Earth, and it's actually part of our country's arsenal of biological warfare agents, if you can believe that. And domoic acid at the bottom is one that it may not be as bad when it gets into our system. It's closer to the lethal dose of from a rattlesnake when you get domoic acid poisoning, but it happens to be a really serious threat here in California's marine ecosystems. So SCOOS, what we're doing is observing these potentially harmful species every week at many of the piers in Southern California. We also measure toxins like domoic acid and saxitoxin. Recent funding has actually allowed us to put robotic microscopes on the piers. This comes from California Ocean Protection Council. In order to do this, this is to sort of reduce that labor-intensive work that would go on most of the time under a microscope in a lab. Instead, every 20 minutes, we'd be using facial recognition software to identify those phytoplankton algae cells in the water and then know exactly what is happening at any point in time. We also produce a harmful algal bloom bulletin that is for the public to read every month. You can sign up to the listserv anytime by visiting our website. This bulletin tells you about how we predict the risk of harmful algae toxins using powerful models, what the animals in the region have become sick from, if it's been toxins or not, and what the state of California is warning the public regarding harvesting shellfish in our region. So one of the bulletins we put out last year was focused on the red tide. And this was a phytoplankton bloom that was very visible to the naked eye in the form of red or brown water by day and gorgeous blue light shows by night. I'm sure many of you saw this. You either saw this bioluminescence, which lasted over 2 weeks, or maybe you smelled the rotting decay of algae and dead animals at the end of the 2-month-long bloom period. But please realize that normally this type of microscopic algae, in this case here, does not cause such death and destruction, but this time it did. And it really caught us off guard, just like COVID did, and started right around the same time. So we saw hundreds, if not thousands, of dead invertebrates, such as octopus, dead fish littering the beaches. And we even had octopus die in tanks from the water brought in from the ocean. And this was really not normal for around here. So we have this responsibility to try to understand it and see if we can predict if it would happen again. I have a little video here, but I'm going to skip over for the sake of time. So scoos, we don't measure these harmful algal blooms or their toxins south of Scripps Pier as it stands right now. So it's hard for us to know exactly what sort of harmful algae species might respond to the pollution events originating from Tijuana River. But what we do know, however, is that there was a major bloom of a fish-killing algae called Coclodinium that occurred in the plume waters right after that May 2017 sewage spill that I mentioned earlier. And the only reason we know about this is because our colleagues in Mexico, CSSE, were doing a research cruise inside and outside of the plume at the time. And so the heat map here on the upper right shows you in red that there was a very high density of this fish-killing organism in and around the pollution plume, and it was associated with the timing of the death of bluefin tuna being raised in pens nearby. So I'll close by saying that moving forward, Scoos is looking for ways to keep track of these blooms further south, both for our health and for the health of our food supply. So now I'd like to give the floor to Falk. I'm going to unshare my screen and we'll talk more about invisible threats that we should be aware of. So here we go. It's all you now, Falk.
Thank you, Clarissa. I'm going to share my screen now, and then I will hit play. So thank you, Councilmember Moreno, and everyone who is here on this webinar for attending and allowing me to present to you guys. So my first trip down to IB was in 1994 to go surfing, and it's a place that's very special to me. And you know, the water, growing up in the ocean, the water quality impacts that the entire region there faces, not just Imperial Beach, but also Playas Tijuana and other locations in Mexico, you know, really hits home for me. And that's sort of like one of the motivations why I'm working on this. What I'm going to talk to you guys about, and so I've been working on this issue directly in IB since 2009. And I saw many people who are here on this call, friendly faces that I know. And thank you for coming. So this photograph here just shows an example. This is from an experiment we did in 2009, where the water here is pink, not because it's pink because we put this pink dye into the water to look to see how the dye gets transported along the coast. And we would use this as sort of like fake pollution to try and understand how, if there was real sewage in the water, how it would get transported and how it would get diluted along the coast. And we've done a series of these experiments. You guys may remember, those of you down there, in 2015, we did another suite of experiments that got a lot of news coverage and on social media and stuff. One of the things that these experiments did with the dye, and I'll show you some more pictures with that, is it helped us develop a numerical model, a computer model that's sort of like equivalent to an ocean equivalent to weather forecasting model. What I'm going to tell you guys about today is sort of stuff that's sort of like hot off the presses, the sort of like the latest and the greatest. And this work is being done. It's both myself and my colleague at Scripps, Professor Sarah Giddings. And what I'm going to tell you about is sort of like how we can actually model the illness risk that you have from swimming or bathing in raw wastewater throughout this entire region, from Playas Tijuana up to Coronado. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have to click. As I mentioned, here we have this pink water from the dye that's getting ejected out and transported to the north. And the pink water, we kind of use it as fake pollution. But as everyone on this call knows, there's significant raw wastewater inputs to the region. And so what I'm going to do is tell you about a little bit about the regional wastewater sources and show you what some of the things that the model can predict. So we're going to take a quick focused look at Imperial Beach and the swimming risk at Imperial Beach. and then look at the swimming risk for the entire region. Okay, so there's two principal sources of raw wastewater to the region: the Tijuana River Estuary and the San Antonio de los Buenos outfall at Punta Bandera, and SAB is San Antonio de los Buenos. Okay, so first, the Tijuana River Estuary is located here, just north of the border. The estuary goes all the way back. The star is not in the right location, but the star is supposed to indicate where the river comes into the estuary, and the river crosses the border, and it's the overflow into the river plus through some canyons over here where you get sewage going into the estuary, making it all smelly and stuff, but then also coming out into the ocean and contaminating the ocean. In addition, there's another location, San Antonio de los Buenos at Punta Bandera, where this photo here showing the river of basically raw wastewater coming out onto the beach. This is located 10 kilometers south of the border, or if you prefer, 6 miles south of the border. And both of these have significant impacts on the region. So let's just take a look at what the Tijuana River Estuary impacts might be. Here's the Tijuana River Estuary. This is the northern arm. This is Seacoast Drive and Imperial Beach. This is the border, and this is Playas Tijuana down here. And in 2015, we released dye. We released 30 gallons of this rhodamine dye at the mouth of the estuary where the pink dot is. And then basically 2 hours later, this is what the dye plume looked like. So the dye basically moved to the south, and this was during a south swell, and the swirl of dye ejected offshore. And hopefully this is clear enough for everybody to see on their computer screens. Ah, yes, here's the pink water. And this kind of dye plume here looks a little bit like the sediment plumes that you can get after it rains coming out of the Tijuana River Estuary. And here's a nice photo from Wild Coast and Surge of a sediment plume coming out and expanding cross shore as it's propagating to the north. Now the water here is brown, largely because of sediment, but there's also human fecal matter also embedded into this. Okay, and then under normal conditions, and normal really is pre-2016, the raw wastewater would come into the estuary when it rains, and there would be an upper limit of about 10 million gallons per day of stuff that just from the accounting of all the sewage in the Tijuana system. But what I'm going to show you, we're not considering catastrophic infrastructure failure conditions, why I put an asterisk there, which is the sort of conditions that have occurred since 2017 when many of the pump stations in Tijuana have broken down and other issues. Okay, San Antonio de los Buenos, as I said, is 10 kilometers south of the border here. And this is a video, this is the toll road here going down from Playas Tijuana further towards Rosarito. And this is essentially raw sewage going under the toll road. And this is a video from Surf Rider and from Wild Coast. And I saw Gabriella on this. Hello, Gabriella. This is a wonderful, wonderful video. And so this is 35 million gallons a day of raw sewage that's getting just dumped onto the beach here at Punta Bandera. And both of these have significant impacts. And this is pure concentrated sewage here, essentially, have lots of impacts along the coast. Okay, so first, to understand those impacts, we have to think about what the surf zone is and how the currents get transported, how stuff gets transported along the coast in the surf zone. So this is the same photo I showed you earlier, but the star now represents where we released the dye during this dye release. And you can see the dye basically all went to the north, and in about a little over an hour, it got basically to the IB pier. And the reason why the dye went to the north, as indicated by this arrow, is because the waves at this time were coming from the southwest. This was a dye release experiment in September. And when the waves come from the southwest, when they break, they impart essentially a force onto the water column, and it drives the currents in the surf zone to the north. And whatever's in the water gets carried to the north. Okay, well, in the summertime, we typically have waves that come from the southwest because the storms in the summertime come from the southern hemisphere winter. In the wintertime, we have waves in the North Pacific, and they make waves that come out of the northwest. So in the summertime, you typically have flows that go to the north in the surf zone, and in wintertime, you typically have flows that go to the south. It's not always, but it's on average. Okay, so with this information and the dye release studies that we did in this concept of there's seasonality in the currents, then we can take a look at some model outputs from the year of 2017. And again, these ocean models are analogous to weather models. I'm going to show you two cases. One, a big winter event where the source is the TGRE. So this is in early January after a lot of rainfall, and basically the sewage is coming out of the Tijuana River estuary, and it's basically jetting offshore, and it's making a right-hand turn, and it's going up the coast, and it's going all the way up to Coronado. So HDC is the Hotel del Coronado, right? And this sort of superficially looks a little bit analogous to the sediment plume that you can see here in this photo. And when we look at this color scale here, I just want to show you this 10 to the minus 2, 10 to the minus 3, 10 to the minus 4. This is written in scientific notation, but I think the thing to note is that 10 to the minus 3 is a 1 in 1,000 dilution. So basically you're swimming in 1 part in 1,000 of raw sewage. And that's about the color that is throughout all of this. Another way to think about this is to take a teaspoon of a liquid, you put it in a gallon jug, and you fill it up with the rest of it with clean water, you shake it around, and that's what you're going to be bathing in. And I asked people, do you want to, would you want to bathe in that? And I have not yet gotten an answer that, yes, I do. Okay, so we can also look at a summertime large event that comes from San Antonio de los Buenos, Punta Bandera, and that's located here. And when you have this is a time when there's basically 10 days in a row of big south swell and south winds. And what it does is it leads to this plume that just hugs the coast and stays relatively concentrated throughout the entire part of this San Diego bight. And again, this down here at Punta Bandera, this is what's flowing out into the ocean. And so here the concentration levels are, even stronger than this 1 in 1,000 dilution. Okay, so this is what the modeling can do for us. It can really tell us what is happening to the wastewater concentrations when it moves along the coast. But of course, this is for the past. This is for 2017. This is to help us understand what the event did. Now, one of the other things we can do is we can use this to estimate swimmer illness risk from norovirus. Okay, well, what is norovirus? Well, first of all, norovirus is not COVID-19. It's a totally different class of virus. However, norovirus is plentiful in raw sewage, and it dominates the risk to swimmers who are swimming in water that is contaminated with sewage. Okay? Now, another important thing is that norovirus is not tested for in beach water sampling. What is tested for is something called indicator bacteria that indicates or suggests that there may be a fecal source, but it's not necessarily that it is. Okay, norovirus symptoms. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to make you vomit. It's going to make you have diarrhea, and it's also going to give you fevers and aches and headaches. Okay. Now we know the statistics of norovirus in raw sewage. That is, we know how many individual virus particles there are per gallon, let's say. And if we know how many swimmers there are, well, we can start to say something about how many people get sick. Okay. Well, at Imperial Beach, the lifeguards, they keep track of how many people go to the beach per month. And that is what this top graph here is showing us. So in the height of summer, there's 300 swimmers per hour. And that makes sense. And then in wintertime, there's more like 20 swimmers per hour. And that also kind of, that also kind of makes sense. And then we can take these numbers here and then take them and then look at the raw wastewater concentrations and what we know about norovirus. And we can actually estimate the number of ill swimmers per hour from norovirus from swimming in the contaminated sewage. And that's what's shown here. So over the entire year, in the winter months, you only get 1, 2, sometimes 5 swimmers per hour sick. But at the height of July, during that gigantic south swell event, you could have more than 40 swimmers an hour sick from norovirus alone because they're swimming in diluted wastewater. And just to note that overall, there's 864,000 yearly swimmers. So that's about 1/3 of all the beachgoers are classified as swimmers, and 34,000 essentially we calculate become sick from norovirus, which is 4% of all people who swim over the entire year. Okay, well. Well, then it's useful then to think about, well, how often should the beach be closed simply for norovirus, not just at Imperial Beach, but now from 4 different popular locations. So Playas Tijuana, Imperial Beach, Silver Strand, and the Hotel del Coronado. And if you take a look at what the EPA guidelines say, if you have more than 3.2 swimmers out of 100 getting sick, or the probability of illness is greater than 0.032, then the beach should be closed, okay? Now this is a guideline, this is not actually implementable because the EPA doesn't have standards for how to determine that yet. They are trying to develop these things. It's all sort of part of the research work, but this is their standard, 3.2 out of 100. Well, we can calculate that from the model, and we can calculate it at all of these locations. And so remember, I said 4% of the swimmers were getting sick throughout the entire year. That's over the entire year, that's more than 3.2. Well, here now we can tell you what percentage of the time the beach should be closed from norovirus. And let's first just take a look at Playas Tijuana, the sister city just south of the border. It's a beautiful beach. And then we break things down for the entire year of 2017, the wet season, which is essentially October to April, and then the tourist season, which is Memorial Day to Labor Day. Okay, so for all of those situations, Playas Tijuana is in a pretty bad situation with around 60% of the time the beach should be closed from norovirus. Imperial Beach is a little bit better, but it's also about 35 to 45% depending on which time of year you're considering. As you get further north, the percentage of time you should be closed according to this model decreases, but still even in Coronado, at the Hotel del Coronado, in the summertime, it's almost 28% of the time. And so Playas Tijuana is the most impacted. This is because it's closest to San Antonio de los Buenos for the south swell. And then also in the wintertime, preferentially what comes out of the estuary preferentially wants to go south. It'll go both directions, but it preferentially wants to go south. And so that's why Playas Tijuana has the biggest impacts overall. And summertime has large impacts. And so just in closing, just show you this graph again, but what else can we do with this, right? Is that we have shown that we have a method for determining the illness rates or the illness risk. This sort of concept is applicable also to other pathogens. This is going to allow us to determine the benefits of different types of wastewater infrastructure projects. And the thing that we'd really like to do is basically, instead of run the past, we'd like to run a forecast model, just like a weather model does. So it would tell you 3 to 5 days in advance what the likelihood, what the risk is of going to the beach and getting sick. And with that, I end. Thank you. Should I stop sharing?
Yes, please.
I will, yes.
Thank you to Dr. Anderson and Dr. Feddersen. The work that you're doing to understand and predict how pollution flows and impacts not only the environment, but human health is very critical. I would like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Kimberly Prather. Dr. Prather is a distinguished professor and a distinguished chair in atmospheric chemistry in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Scripps. Dr. Prather developed a technique known as aerosol time of flight mass spectrometry that is being used in atmospheric field studies worldwide to determine the source of atmospheric aerosol. A primary focus of her research involves understanding how aerosol impacts the climate, with the major emphasis on the role in modifying clouds and precipitation process. She also serves as co-principal investigator on a project to build the Scripps Ocean Atmosphere Research Simulator, known as SOARS, a new state-of-the-art wind wave channel that will mimic the ocean with unprecedented accuracy, enabling scientists to explore how the introduction of pollutants by human activity is changing the chemistry of the ocean and atmosphere. Slated for operation this year, SOAR will be the only facility in the world capable of simulating future atmospheres with increasing pollution under different ocean and atmospheric conditions. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Prather, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Superintendent Moreno. I'm sharing, right? Can you see my screen okay? Let me see. Okay, here we go. Okay, so first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for everybody who is here. I'm going to try and get through relatively quickly because I'm told we're a little bit short on time. But tonight I'm going to sort of shift gears a little bit and talk about how pollution in the ocean can actually affect our health and the air quality, how it can get out of the ocean, and studies we're doing down in the Imperial Valley region looking at this. So first of all, I direct a National Science Foundation Center that's looking at ocean atmosphere interactions, and it's a large research center. It's 12 other institutions. It's headquartered at Scripps at UC San Diego, but it's a real, so a lot of the work I'm going to talk about, sort of setting the stage for the work that we're now able to do. I have to thank a lot of people for getting us to this point. So one of the things we told NSF early on was we're going to replicate the ocean and the atmosphere in the lab and try to understand how the ocean is influencing our atmosphere and our clouds and our climate and ultimately human health. And a lot of people think that when you walk at the beach, you're just breathing this nice salty air. But as we've learned, or we just heard about, and people know, there can be quite a bit of sewage, especially down in the Imperial Beach region. And so we started with just sort of thinking about just basic seawater, and even just basic seawater has millions of viruses and bacteria and phytoplankton. As you've heard, sort of all signs of life are in there. And so one of the things we're studying is what gets transferred into the air. And so this is the facility that we do a lot of these studies when we're indoors. I'll talk about outdoors in a minute. But basically, it's a large wave channel where we can put seawater, ocean water in, and we can look and basically ask this question. This is when we're doing a huge study in 2019. We can ask the question, which microbes, which viruses, which pathogens, which heavy metals, which pollutants go from the ocean to the atmosphere? Because that is the question that matters. That basically, that will affect the health of a lot more people. So it's not just people going in the ocean. It's not just surfers and swimmers. It's not just people walking on the beach. This air can be transported over miles and people can breathe it. And the main thing that you're exposed to from an environmental risk perspective is breathing the air. And so this is something we've been very, very interested in. So we've been working on that. We've been finding out that luckily, not everything comes out of the ocean into the air. But then we decided to go down to Imperial Beach in the study that Falk just mentioned, Seaside, which I'll give a little bit of a background on our interest in it. But you've seen this picture in the movie the video you saw early on. We're getting more and more of these storm surges. And these storm surges lead to a massive amount of not just the sewage going in the river, but also just pollution runoff that goes into the ocean. And all of that pollution it doesn't just go and dilute in the ocean, it can actually get thrust into the atmosphere, especially especially if it gets trapped in the surf zone. So breaking waves, have this basically are very, very effective. Most of the pollution doesn't really want to be in the ocean. So it will float on top, just like oil on your oil and vinegar dressing. And so when waves crash, these bubbles burst and massive amounts of these sort of pollutants can become airborne. So you have to think about it one step further. This is the basic ocean. This is where we started in case, but now we have to think about what about regions of pollution runoff and all the things that we find in raw sewage, such as pathogens, toxins, illicit drugs, untreated sewage. What all is getting transferred from the ocean to the atmosphere? So you've seen plenty of pictures of what it looks like when large amounts of sewage go into the ocean. But what you see is, and Falk talked about this a little bit, is that there are certain indicators that are used, usually fecal indicators or traditional indicators. And when they see this, they shut down the beach. They tell you, don't go in the water. But nobody tells you, don't breathe the air, right? So we are very, very interested in sort of understanding, what is coating the cars that we heard about in Imperial Beach. And so in this region. So this, you've seen this, just to touch on it. What happened was Falk Feddersen and Sarah Giddings that he mentioned and their groups were going to be looking at, they were very focused on, when you release this dye, how does it move up and down the coast? We came along and we were very interested we decided to piggyback. This was their study, but they let us participate. And we said, what happens to it? Can we actually see the dye in the air? So we put air samplers all over San Diego County, because as I say, once it becomes airborne, that air can go from the coast all the way to Arizona. So it covers that sort of the entire district, if you will. And so we basically put out these samplers. This is Charlotte Beal and Matt Pendergraft from my group. And they were the interesting thing about the dye is it's pink. And so we could detect it very clearly if it made it into the air. It's a very characteristic signature. As Falk explained, it's a mimic for, if we see the dye, then pollution would presumably behave very similarly. And the question is, did we see it in the air? There were 3 dye releases. We looked at all of the 3 dye releases. We knew what the winds were. We knew what the waves were, as you've heard. And so, did we see it in the air or not? And from release 1 and release 3, we did. Only on the first 2 days, but we saw it wherever we kind of, in the places that are marked by the pink markers. The blue are places we were sampling that we didn't see it. But in the release 2, we didn't see it. And what you see is that release 2 just kind of shot up the coast. So we were sampling here, so, ocean conditions matter. Nobody has done this before. Nobody has ever looked at the amount of pollution that's in the ocean and the concentration that makes it in the ocean and then said, okay, what becomes airborne? We are now able to do this. And this is one of the beauties of being at Scripps, is that we've got oceanographers who have all of that you've already heard about. Sort of, we have all the swell, the conditions, what the microbes are. And so we can start looking at what becomes airborne and how is that affecting human health. And so coming to that, speaking of human health, since we were already doing this project when the current pandemic hit, knowing that there were studies that showed that this virus goes into the raw sewage. And so we became interested in, okay, you've got the sewage coming from the Tijuana region, and that is going into the estuary and then into the ocean. Do we see it? Can we detect this virus, this SARS-CoV-2 virus that leads to COVID-19? Can we detect it in environmental samples? And so this is kind of the region that we're sampling, the air up and down along the coast. And so just to kind of zoom in, this is the number of samples that we collected in a period between May and September. So right during the pandemic. Actually, it was also during the red tide. So we also did spend some time looking for the toxin in the air, which is a whole nother research project. But what the size of the dots is the amount of water in blue and the amount of air samples that we collect, the number that we collected. And so you can see that, the water is very dirty. These are the air samplers that we use to collect things, the filters, and we can time when we're collecting things with when we know that it's when it's flowing into the ocean and when the winds are correct to come to our samplers. I want to point out, though, that we didn't really expect to find it in the air during this period because this is, quote, the dry season still. So there's not that much flow of that sewage into the ocean during this period, thankfully. But when we actually looked at, say, the river water, the estuary water, the ocean water, and the aerosol. This gray is the amount of river flow. And so how much is flowing into the ocean? You can see it started out kind of high in April and then it fell off. And the markers are just looking at the water samples. And what you see is that, over time, as COVID became more and more prevalent, especially down in the Tijuana region, we saw it go up in the water. And so looking at the total samples that we analyzed, basically detected and not detected, in the river water, we detected it pretty much every time, the virus. In the estuary, about half. In the ocean water, only once. That's good news. And in the air, the really good news is we haven't detected it in the air during the dry season. Rebecca Simpson, who's the person, the lead on this project, has now collected samples when we know there was a lot of flow of the sewage during the wet season, and we're working up that data now. The last thing I'll just touch on really quickly, so we have a little bit of time for questions, and is basically work we're doing in this region, because the air quality down in this region is notoriously bad, but it's undermeasured. And so we're establishing an air quality network with people. These are particle aerosol sensors for what you're breathing. And we're working with people that live in the region. We're working with schools in the region. These are the measurements. They're on a map. You can open the map anytime you want and see. You can put these inside your house. You can put them outdoors. And so we're working to try and increase our air sampling in this region. We're also working down in Tijuana. We go down to Tijuana, we have this traveling trunk. We work with the schools down in this region along the border. We've been actually, this is when we went down into Tijuana. We have this trunk that we use to teach kids about climate and air quality and aerosols. This is a cloud in a bottle experiment. You can see this teacher is very popular. These students see that when there's aerosols, they seed the clouds, and you get this, they're very happy. They basically look at how clouds form, why aerosols matter. They get very, very excited. This is like one of the best parts of my job, is getting people this excited. And all kids do this. And so we've got some really good partnerships down in this region that are really blossoming right now. So finally, what are the policy implications? I mean, basically, we're just working really hard to understand how this ocean pollution, which everybody worries about the water effects, but the air affects many more people. And people know in Imperial Beach, I keep hearing people say, I don't feel well. I haven't been at the beach, but I still don't feel well. And the air smells. What is it? And so we're really ramping up our work to try and understand this connection between ocean pollution and human health. And so we'd like to be able to ultimately be able to forecast it. If we know that it's conditions that are going to be conducive to a lot of pollution being in the ocean, we can actually tell people, be careful, the air quality today is not good. And we can correlate different types of health effects we see with things like hospital admits. I'm not going to spend too much time, but you may have seen me. I've been on the news quite a bit. I've been working a lot in the area on trying to understand the airborne nature. This virus is in the air. That is how people are getting exposed. So I'm helping San Diego Unified in the reopening plan, and boy, the air in those schools is as clean as it's going to get. So I'm very happy about that. One thing I will say just briefly, one of the issues is the air quality in the regions, in these regions, is really notoriously poor. And so these kids that are raised in these regions are breathing, some of the worst air. If we can work to clean up the air, which is what I'm pitching to the Biden administration right now with ventilation and better filtration, beyond COVID-19, we will be able to improve the air that kids are breathing, which is going to help their cognitive and respiratory issues that they have. So, ongoing, we're keeping going, we're expanding our network. We're happy to work with people. We have our sampler that we have one particular house that we go to that's in a perfect spot. Thank you. I'm not sure if she's on the call, but if other people are interested or curious, we're also going to start, we were just getting ready when the pandemic hit to start swabbing people to try and surfers, like before and after they went in the water, to see what is getting into them. It's one thing to say it's in the air. It's another thing to say it's actually getting in. These different pathogens and toxins are getting into people. So this is an ongoing area of research. Finally, I just will touch on SOARS is coming. It's going to be tested. We should be able to start running experiments, I hope, this summer. This is a one of a kind we can do, as was already mentioned, ocean atmosphere studies extending to even things like sea ice formation, and we can control temperature and it'll be completely integrated. This is going to have waves, though, on top of everything else. So it's right next to the other flume. So it's going to be very exciting. It's the only facility of its kind in the world. And with that, lots of people to thank. It's been an amazing collaborative project. I think we've just scratched the surface. I think this is not just in Imperial Beach that it's an issue. It's affecting coastal air quality everywhere. And so I think once we sort of get these results out, there's going to be a big push for people to understand more in a lot of regions of the world. And again, thank you for listening. And I'm going to stop now so we can go to the fun part, which is the question and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Prather. Your innovative aerosol research is incredibly relevant and impactful, not only to the Tijuana River Valley and Imperial Beach, but also I think all across the world. And thank you again to all of the presenters. We're now going to turn over to our audience questions. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and we're going to unmute you. And just remember, we have allocated 10 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to let Chris in my staff take over. If you'd like to call people who have raised their hand, please.
Yep, thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Stanley Fair, you will now have the chance to speak.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I moved out to San Diego with my wife about 17, 18 years ago when I retired from New York. And I've been hearing about this pollution problem for a long while. And I keep on hearing things, the federal government is going to do this, the federal government is going to do that. Why hasn't anything been done yet between the state of California, the federal government, the government of Mexico? Why hasn't the Tijuana River been cleaned? And I remember this past year, I saw a fantastic 60 Minutes program on CBS about the Tijuana River. It is terrible. And why hasn't the government stepped in and done something yet? Thank you.
I'll take this question. Well, first and foremost, we're talking about an international issue here. So we're talking to a sovereign country, which is Mexico, and it's at an international field. I could say for myself, I've been the council member for 2 years for this area. And there have been many things that we have done. One, we sued the IBWC for not upholding the 1942 Clean Water Act. 2, we have SB 507 that has outlined with the county. SB 507 provided the money for the county to outline what infrastructure needs are required on this side of the border. And the third part is through NAFTA, we were able to allocate $300 million for potential future funds for this, not only for this region, but for other regions, for other binational regions. And I am missing one other funding source. Chris, if
The
you
State
could.
Coastal Conservancy grant.
The state, thank you. We also have the State Coastal Conservancy. So if we were to be a bird and take it up a mile, 30% of the topography of the Tijuana River Valley is in Mexico. 30% of the topography of the Tijuana River Valley is in the United States, and it's the mouth of the river. The other 70% is in Mexico. So it is a complicated matter. We are trying to address issues on this side of the border, and we are working simultaneously with the Mexican government. Now, there has been a commitment by the president of Mexico that this is one of his priorities. There is outdated infrastructure. I will say, much like in San Diego, there is outdated infrastructure in Tijuana, and they are upgrading it. But I'm going to stop talking because I know we have a lot of questions. And one of the things, here, let's go to the next speaker.
Yep, Miss Gabriela Torres.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Gabriela Torres, and I am the policy coordinator for Surfriders Clean Border Water Now campaign. If you look behind me in my background, you can see some water quality samples. So I went along with some of my colleagues into the Tijuana River Valley today, and we took samples of stagnant water and ponded water in the Tijuana River Valley. I'm not feeling great right now after spending so much time with those odors. Well, my question is for Dr. Prather. I really appreciate the efforts that you're doing right now. But the question is you talked about the coastal air quality. Is your study going to look at the actual air quality in the actual Tijuana River Valley, where it's more heavily kind of populated around there? And also, do you anticipate that your study will be able to make the connection between the air quality and people actually falling ill?
Yes, yes, and yes. So we're gradually expanding. And again, my group would love it if people sort of opportunistically collected samples for us, because one of the things we can do is take those samples and we can spike them in these special tanks we have and look at the transfer in our labs. We can actually, in a more controlled way, see which viruses, or if norovirus or any other viruses are becoming airborne. Ultimately, our goal, though, is to be able to do our air measurements, see which viruses, pathogens, toxins are in the air, and then be able to this is going to be big data science, in the sense that we'll be able to look at, we have all the hospital admit data. We can collect what's getting into people that don't feel well. This is a dream project that we have, I think, all the pieces to really go in and make a difference. And this was sort of a survey that we've done so far. But again, we would love to cooperate more. And if you have water samples, or we actually will put our samplers, we're talking about ways to move our samplers around with battery packs so we can put them in other places. We're very, very interested in getting a better picture of everything that's there. But so far it's been a survey, but it tells us we need to do more.
That's great. So we're conducting a 30-day water quality study in the Tijuana River Valley. So I'll catch up with you offline and see if we can drop some samples off.
Please do, because right now is a really important time. We're also going to try and sequence the water to see the strains of the virus that are coming in Tijuana. We really want to do that. So, again, this is kind of a rare time. I hope it doesn't, we got to grab the water while we can, but we do want to learn more about the virus that's there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next audience member is Mr. Eric Iverson.
Thank you. My name is Eric Iverson. I'm a citizen advocate for Tijuana River. Ms. Torres, thank you for taking those water samples. You and I have discussed the absolute disaster that the center of the valley is. I have a question. Well, first I'll make the statement that I believe the center of the valley is the source of the greatest contaminant, the highest concentrations, and the greatest health impacts. I believe the smells come from the valley itself, not from the ocean, somewhat from the estuary on extreme low tides. But that valley is a disaster right now. I have pictures dating 5 fixed locations to 2017. That would corroborate Mr. Belzer's IBWC water quality study, which indicates leaching in the center of the valley is a great source of pollution. The air quality today, yesterday, the day before, and the day before was so bad that I don't know how Gabriela was able to breathe today while she collected those samples. I really don't. I mean, it is absolutely, Ms. Moreno can speak to this. We have to push these studies east. They have to get inland. They have to check the air east. Have to check the estuary. That dye study for Mr. Feddersen, please. I wish the dye would start at the border, and you will find that water is absolutely trapped for months, if not years at times, just trapped. And the river flows right now. So Dr. Prather, please go right now. It's pure sewage. It's pure sewage right now.
You're getting me excited. I'm getting excited about stinky air. Isn't that pathetic?
It's 1 cubic meters per second, and right now, and that is exactly equivalent to PBC. So it's
Rebecca's on the call. Rebecca, they say go now. My postdoc's on the
Anyways, ma'am, I've seen your work with Jim Kramer back east, and that's amazing. And that man is amazing. So I trust it.
Thank you.
Please get to the center of that valley and check the air for us.
Yeah, you know, we'll make a deal with you. We'll give you some of our little cartridge samplers and we'll let you throw it out and collect the samples when it's really bad. And then we'll come collect them from you and see what's on them. We can do that too.
I'm more than free to do that. I've documented every flow in 2019 dry event. I have pictures and videos that would make everyone
Great.
on this list stomach turn.
I want to know what it is. The smell is the gases, and we also analyze that. I didn't even talk about that. So yeah, we'll put you to work.
It's pure
Sorry,
sewage
Mr. Cyrus,
gas.
we're gonna have to move
Yeah.
on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next is Miss Sharon Beckcast. Sorry if I botched your last name.
No problem. You did fine, Chris. It's now been declared a public health issue, the Tijuana River. And can anyone comment on that? How that will impact it better or worse or what?
I can quickly comment on it. The county just declared a state of emergency for the Tijuana River Valley. The city of San Diego has declared a state of emergency since 1994 for the Tijuana River Valley.
All right, next question, Mr. Bill Sankey. You are unmuted.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Councilmember Moreno, for putting this together. Dr. Prather, I've enjoyed hearing you now a couple of times, and it really is amazing to think of what's going on. At the San Diego Borders Committee, we've heard a lot in the last couple of years about border air quality studies, and there are significant positions where they're putting sensors along the border crossing lines, both at San Ysidro and Otay, and some of those may benefit from your research in terms of looking at things inland. I'm curious though, Dr. Anderson, who spoke first, those HF sensors and that predictive ability to say, hey, over the next couple of days, we might want to have problems at the beaches, particularly as far as Imperial Beach, Silver Strand, and Coronado are concerned. Are there HF sensors, those radar sensors south of the border? And do we have the ability to work with our partners to the south to be able to do that predictive modeling? And then Dr. Feddersen, a quick question.
Councilmember Sankey, I'm sorry, we only have a few minutes and we want to get to other.
Then let's talk about those HF sensors south of the border. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have, I have some people from our team on the radar call here, who work with radar, but we do have a couple there. Part of this radar network does involve some of our colleagues down at CSSA, which I mentioned earlier. And there are a couple of radar that we help manage down there, but not very many. And that's just a source of, these things are pretty expensive. Getting funding to Mexico to put those in is challenging, and the funding just isn't there for them to put them in. So that's all I can say on that now. It'd be great to have a broader partnership where we get more radar south of the border, and they would love that for sure.
Thanks, Doctor.
All right, next question, Miss Cinnamon Clark.
Hi, thank you. San Ysidro resident for almost the last couple decades, heavily involved in all of the efforts down here. And my specific question is, great research. I've heard these a couple times. Are any of these findings and the data that you are collecting being provided to the entities that are the decision-making bodies for resolution? We talked a lot about air quality. One of the proposals in the SB, I think it's 507, was, a sedimentation pond built basically in our backyards. So I'm just wondering if there are any recommendations from the research and your findings to solve these problems.
I'll answer quickly on the air. We are just getting going on the air. We did a broad survey to see what is in the air at this point. What we need to do now is we're building up this network. And then, yes, we hope that we can use it to better understand, the factors that are leading to poor air quality in the region. And so our goal is to get to the point where we're, that's the best part, is to be able to help come up with solutions to help solve the air quality problems. But it's going to take a little bit of time for us to build things up. Some of the bigger findings we have right now in this virus we're supplying those, those are getting documented as we go, but it's going to take a little bit of time to build up a bigger air quality network so we can understand more of what's going on.
And if I could answer from the water side, this is Falk Feddersen. As I mentioned, the work that we did was partially funded by the EPA through the NAD Bank. And one of the things that we did in the modeling study was we tried to evaluate sort of like what the efficacy would be in terms of reducing swimmer illness. And this is focused on swimmer illness, not atmospheric stuff, but what the effect of different types of infrastructure projects would be in terms of reducing swimmer illness. And so that information is going to, you know, decision makers and stuff like that to for them to consider.
Thank you. And our last question for today, Ms. Mary Powell.
Unmute. Hi there, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I'm in Equestrian in the Valley, although I live up north in San Diego proper. I cross the Hollister Street Bridge almost every day on the way to see my horses. And I think that underneath the Hollister Street Bridge, especially the southernmost one, is your biggest source of smelly pollution. Those probably samples should be taken from there. It's in the pilot channel.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
Yeah, we do collect off the Hollister Bridge. That is one of the places. I'm not sure. I've heard there's sort of two regions. And so, yeah, we can talk more. But yeah, as I say, I'm happy to get some citizen science going on getting us more samples because we can analyze them.
We may have some volunteers who can do that for you.
Be great. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again to UC San Diego Scripps Institute of Oceanography with Dr. Margaret Leiman and Dr. Clarissa Anderson, Dr. Falk Feddersen, and Dr. Prather. And most importantly, our audience for being with us this evening. If you'd like to learn more about this research, please check out the links in the chat. And if you have any questions after this meeting, please feel free to contact my office, and you could always email me at vivianmoreno@sandiego.gov, and we're going to follow up with you. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Moreno. And thanks to all of the participants.